friends. Uh, Today I am here to speak on the title NEP and Policy Changes, Cultural Questions and the Idea of Social Justice. So I'll talk briefly for 30 minutes. I mainly want to talk about the social justice perspective and the cultural hegemony perspective of the new education policy, which was recently introduced by the central government of India. So we all know that the Central Cabinet Ministry has approved the new education policy, which includes directions and suggestions for very radical reformations in the existing educational policy of India, which had not seen much very influential changes in the since the post-colonial, post-independence state of India. So we all know that when we get to know a word like change or reform or progress, we often ally the word with the idea of progress or development. So we have seen that the liberal nationalists and the secular nationalists, those who have hailed and applauded the new educational policy changes, has been approving the policy on this ground, that on the ground of progress and on the idea of development. But it is important, but it is also very important to note that whose progress. So we have to see we have to deconstruct the normative idea of progress in order to understand in order to understand the new meanings of the idea of progress, especially in a state like India, where many factors such as caste, class, which determines the social positions and the power hierarchies which are maintained from the inception of the nation state itself. So at first I want to say that before uploading a policy in the name of reformation or in the name of progress or development, or even in the name of new, it is very important to critically analyze the policy at a state level and at a sociological, anthropological level, to understand its impacts on the society as a whole. So we know that it is by ignoring most of the suggestions and corrections put forward by citizens, many educational organizations, non-governmental organizations and academicians and state governments, that the central cabinet has approved the new education policy without much added contributions from the public beneficiaries. But instead we can see that when the policy was announced, or when the policy was approved by the central cabinet or the central education ministry, we can see that many organizations which are strangely affiliated to RSS, like Bharatiya Shikshan Mandal and all other such educational cultural institutions which are affiliated to Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, has been welcoming the policy by saying that 60% or 70%, and most of their suggestions for reformations were accepted, and they were welcoming the policy. From this we can see that, most of the left organizations and Bahujan organizations and Dalit organizations were criticizing the policy. So from this very point itself we can see who are the major or first-hand beneficiaries of this policy. So secondly, I want to talk about the major structural changes regarding the policy, which will come under the discursive pattern of knowledge and power. So one of the major critiques of the policy says that by centralizing the power related parts of education and its implement, which is constitutionally in the concurrent list. Concurrent list means the list in the constitution which has to be maintained by both state government and central government. So we can see that the policy, many directions in the policy are highly centralizing tendencies we can see many directives in the policy are highly monolithic and homogeneous, and in effect making a unilateral or highly deeply centralized policy. So in the sociological context of India, we can see that the decentralization of education is a very, very important factor in order to understand the comprehend complex caste class dynamics, which even today plays the major role in determining the social relations and social dynamics of the society. Moreover, it is this very decentralization of the educational sector which is seminal in resisting various kinds of actions and attempted to implement a monolithic educational system, which was always most of the fascist or right-wing organizations were always advocating for a monolithic or homogeneous education system. From the inception of the nation state itself, we can see many evidences in the Constitutional Assembly debates, from the Constitutional Assembly debates till the recent regime. So it is important to note that the decentralization of education, that is to divide the educational sector under the role of state government, both state government and central government, the education that it is important to divide, it is important to maintain that divide, to keep the federal structure of the society in order to maintain the diverse cultural dynamics and fabric of the society. So when we look at the major changes in the new education policy, we can see that UGC, the University Grants Council, is replaced by HEGC, that means Higher Educational Grants Council, through an act which is named as HEC Act. So this is not just a mere name changer act, but we can see that UGC is an autonomous entity or autonomous body according to the 1956 Act of UGC. But when it comes to HEGC, the new one suggested by the NEP, we can see that it is a body under the control of central government, where the members are also appointed by the central government. Likewise, UGC's major role is viewed in relation with the allocation of funds or distribution of funds in the area of, especially in the area of higher education. When the new policy comes in effect, we can see that HEFA, like HEFA, Higher Education Financing Agency, will take decisions in the economic and funding related matters in the higher education sector. This will also come under the this financing body will also come under the direct rule of central government, according to the aforementioned HEC Act. In short, the decisions related to fund allocations and distributions in the higher education will be in the hands of central government, that is to deeply politicize the higher education system. So we can see that this is an enormous power. So the central government in effect is getting an enormous power to control the entire entire economic and administrative levels of the higher education sector, higher education institutions in the country. So we can also it is also important to note that under HEFA, the financing agency, the financial assistance will be provided mostly as loans instead of grants. So this is a very important point. So this scenario will in effect pressurize the public universities to collect funds in their own way, which might result in constant fee hikes, more self-financing courses, eradicating permanent teaching posters and attracting private corporate investments. In effect, it will privatize the university spaces, and the university spaces will be in effect exclusive, and it will exclude the marginalized minority sessions coming from the underprivileged backgrounds when the university is faced with a economic crisis. So we can see that all these cost cutting measures will act as a catalyst in the process of privatization, which is also a corporate demand. Privatization was always a demand put forward by corporates. We can see that there was a report in 2000 titled Birla Ambani report, which was submitted to central government, in which they demand the complete depoliticization of the higher education campuses. So this process, this technical power shifting process should be viewed in relation with another project which is already in motion, which is titled as RUSA, which can be elaborated as Rashtriya Uchchar Shiksha Abhiyan, which is in effect in there for the past decade. So one of the major goals of the RUSA project is which is functioned along with the assistance of Tata Institute of Science, is the gradual defunding in the higher education sector. Defunding means the stopping of government grants and funds to the higher educational universities gradually. So all these measures which are mentioned above regarding the higher educational policy level shifters is we can see that it is a very planned step in order to privatize the higher education sector, in order to completely exclude the marginalized minorities from the spheres of higher education, from getting the access to the higher educational bodies, higher educational institutions. So we can also see that there is a mention of philanthropy, there is this mention of philanthropical investments in the report or in the draft or in the bill. So when these philanthropic investors, this is actually a sugar-coated name for the private corporate investors. Philanthropic investors are always masquerade private corporates always masquerade as philanthropic investors in various sectors, especially in the educational sector. So we can see that when the fee hike becomes a reality, and when a constant fee hike becomes a reality in the central universities, we can see that the central universities already lack a fair representation of marginalized minority communities since its inception. So when a kind of constant when the central universities are shifting into a constant or a gradual process of privatization, we can see that the already vulnerable marginalized minority sessions who are weak in their representations in the central universities will be further excluded and alienated from these areas of education and higher education. It will also cause a structural transformation of demographic proportion of students and teachers who have been vocal against the regime to an extent, and will result in further alienation of the lower caste class marginalized voices which are already vulnerable and suffocating under the gradual transformation of Savarna public sphere. The end result of this process will be the Savarna capitalist satisfaction process, which will produce a kind of a generation of students and teachers who are completely mechanical in their acts and extremely weak in their political imaginations and in the act of dissent, which will mean that most of the lower caste marginalized minority Bahujan bodies will be excluded from the public from the educational sphere, where they have been vocal to the injustices and the discrimination, systematic and fundamental discriminations existing in the educational sector. And when the privatization happens, most of the students who can afford the education will be coming from the upper caste sections of the society, and they will the logical conclusion is that they will be actually silent, or they will not be vocal as the marginalized societies who are often the first hand recipients of violence, not only in the campus but also outside the campus in society in large. So thus the logical result will be that the universities will transform as upper caste, apolitical and neoliberal spaces which absorbs and reproduces capitalistic logics of progress and not independent Baujan ideas of social justice. So the next thing in the report is that the report constantly invokes and celebrates such imaginations as Indian culture, Indian values, and Indian traditions. Like we have to critically examine what is this Indian, what is this Indian culture, what is this Indian tradition, what is this Indian values. This kind of monolithic understanding of Indian is not only violent and totalitarian, but also it makes impossible to the exact idea of Indian from the imagination of Hindu. So there is this mention by Talal Asad, the famous anthropologist, in his seminal work Formation of Secular. So he mentions that the publicly recognizable personality of the nation is strongly mediated by the representations of upper caste Hinduism. So from the report we can see that the mentions such as Indian tradition, Indian values, Indian culture is often very difficult to stratify it from the Hindu tradition, Hindu culture, the upper caste Hindu tradition, upper caste Hindu culture and upper caste Hindu values. So this is almost evident from the suggestions and the aspirations of the report, from mentions like the rich heritage of ancient and eternal Indian knowledge and thought has been a guiding light for this policy. I am quoting from the policy. To crucial policy level suggestions, we can evidently see the constant going back to the golden age of Indian culture, which was very well an Orientalist construction or an Orientalist imagination. It also tries to put modern scientific advancement and medical development along with the ancient Vedic culture, or it tries to trace the trajectory of the modern scientific advancements which was possibilized by in the modernity period. The policy tries to connect it with the policy tries to find its roots in the ancient Vedic culture. So the new policy celebrates and demands the complete education of the another important point to note is that the new education policy celebrates and it completes the demands of RSS. They were constantly demanding for a 3-language policy, and the new education policy approves this 3-language policy. According to the 3-language policy, students are compelled to study 3 languages, 2 of them native to India till 5th grade, but preferably till 8th grade and beyond. So at a first glance, it does not appear as a problematic implementation, but when you look at the surface level effectiveness of the policy, what we can see is the clear agenda of cultural hegemony. In the policy, Sanskrit is deemed as an important modern language. It is very important to note, the Sanskrit is referred to as an important modern language, and the policy goes on to describe the glories of this Vedic language, Sanskrit language, for almost 2-3 paragraphs. According to the policy, Sanskrit as a language of entire knowledge system will be promoted by central government itself along with the national language Hindi, and will be offered at all levels of school and higher education as an important option. When languages like Tamil and Malayalam are limited with their geographical vernacular indicators, Hindi and Sanskrit, while having the same geographical and class indicators respectively, effectively transcends to an imagination of standard modern Indian languages. So we can see that when the vernacular languages such as Tamil, Malayalam are limited by their geographical markers, the language Hindi and the Sanskrit is often they often transcend these vernacular or class limits, and they are referred to as national important modern languages. So we can see that there is a very riotous history of endless debates and struggles relating to the Hindi language and its national significance, especially from the South Indian states. We have seen many resistance to protect vernacular languages, to resist Hindi imposition in the states, especially from the state of Tamil Nadu and from Kerala. So we can see that there is this riotous history present in the South Indian states to resist the implementation of Hindi and Sanskrit. So we can see that it is like very difficult in such a situation, in such a complex sociological dynamic, to refer Hindi as the national language of India in a very important educational policy which is supposed to be applied in the whole parts of India despite the whatever majority language majority regions. So we can see that the Vedic Brahmanic hegemony, which worked as an invisible factor till the date in the language policies, in the education sector, and in the various ideological determinants. So we can see by the implementation of Sanskrit, by the direct implementation of Sanskrit into the education sector, we can see that the invisible Vedic Brahmanic hegemony will start to act visibly with the official support of the state, and will be promoted and appreciated across the geographies of the state, regardless of caste, class, linguistic remarcations. So I would like to bring in your attentions to another brilliant paper, another brilliant study titled as "Breaking the Chaturvarnya System of Languages," which was written by Hani Babu MT, professor, an eminent academician of Delhi University, who was recently arrested in relation with the Bhima Koregaon case by NIA. So in that study, like, Hani Babu is a linguist and a teacher of English language in the Department of English in the Delhi University. So in that paper, he argues that the both the constitutional scheme and the official language policy of the Indian state envisages not a relationship of complementation between various languages spoken in India, but a hierarchical system. So he means that like we can see when we talk about languages in India, there is this normative conception that we are a diverse country. We have we have a plural culture. We have many languages. But Hani Babu argues that these languages are maintained by a deeply structural hierarchical system. So he, while building his argument, further goes on to say that several layers at which discrimination operates with Sanskrit, Hindi, the scheduled and non-scheduled languages, all occupying various rungs of the ladder. So he imagines a ladder. In a hierarchical ladder in which all the languages such as Sanskrit, Hindi, the scheduled languages mean the scheduled languages in the constitution, and the non-scheduled languages in India comes in a hierarchical order. So he also argues that this hierarchical order is inspired from none other than the Varna system. That is why he is titling his paper. He titled his paper as the "Breaking the Chaturvarna System of Languages." So there is this notion. There is this debatable notion which I will come to later. That there is this debatable notion of the change implemented in the new education policy. So the new education policy says that the new education policy shifts the medium of education in the primary grades into the native language. So this debate, the native language English debate is a very prominent and long-standing debate in the Bahujan academic and Bahujan educational sphere. So in order to understand the debate, we have to go through various arguments in related to both sides. Both sides. By mentioning both sides, I mean those who advocate for the English language and those who advocate for the native language. But we can see that the new education policy suggests for a shift, suggests for a native language shift in the primary pedagogy. But we can see that this is a very tricky position. So when we see at a primary glance, when we look at the policy, this language policy at a primary glance, we can see that the medium of education, the medium of instruction is shifted into the native language. But all students are grasping education in their own languages. But we can see that the Dalit, Adivasi, Muslim, Bahujan minority students will evidently lack the the linguistic capacities, and written capacities of English language, spoken verbal capacities of English language, while these Savarna students can access it from various resources which they already possess by their traditional whatever social capital, which social cultural capital for centuries, by privileging from the deeply discriminative caste hierarchical system which is prevailing in the country. So while acknowledging the decolonial critical positions on the language policy in a society like India, where caste structure is evident to cultural transactions, the language has its own importance. Dalit Bahujan thinkers like Chandraban Prasad and Kanja Elia English as a language, as a tool to empower Dalits, like as an emancipatory tool to empower Dalits and other marginalized sections. So this is I am arguing this is not to presuppose that English language will liberate Dalit Bahujans by eradicating all the inequalities. That is such a superficial belief. Like as Santosh Dash argues in one of his major works related to the language policy, he argues that whether education is in English or in the vernacular, it cultivates elitism and casteism in India, where caste is one of the major constituents of social fabric. While caste is an inevitable factor in the context of India, English language rather than mother tongue provides Bahujans a bridge to international sphere. We can see that in the case of the recent shift of Dalit Bahujan academic sphere, where many Dalit scholars are invited to the international academic conferences, and international many Dalit scholars are getting educated. Dalit Bahujan scholars are getting educated and graduated from the various international universities. So the English language has its own importance coming into the socio-cultural sphere of in the sociological context of India, for it provides an emancipatory potential for the Dalit Bahujan minorities in the country, those who lack enough opportunities in the post-colonial state. So English also acts as an important way, in a way that Rita Katari in one of her major works argues that in order to attain a casteless society, it is essential that we enable the citizens to wield a language that has no memory of caste. So English language has this potential which has no memory of caste attached to it. But instead of expanding the possibilities of an egalitarian language, the government, through the three language policy, is reinvoking the violent memories of caste by putting forward the Sanskrit, the Vedic language of Sanskrit, which signifies the systematic caste discriminations which has been prevailed in the country for thousands of years, and by introducing Hindi as a modern national language in the new education policy. Moreover, that even if it says that the state will ensure an egalitarian approach in choosing languages, given the dynamics of the hierarchical order of languages, which I mentioned earlier by drawing from Hani Babu, as Hani himself categorizes it, the lower strata language speaking people. That by mentioning lower strata, I mean that those people, those languages, those vernacular languages which does not possess enough power, enough cultural capital or social capital comparing to Hindi or such other languages. So we can say that even the government does not insist on choosing languages. We can see that the evident social conditions in relation with opportunities and encouragements, the students will have this indirect encouragement to choose Hindi or such other languages which is actively promoted by the central government or in higher education, higher body. For they will provide more opportunities and more further future opportunities. While at the same time, those who speak the languages at the higher strata of this Chaturvarna system, that is, by mentioning that I mean the people who speak the people who speak Sanskrit and Hindi will have no social pressure to learn lower strata languages as the dominant nature of their language will eventually give them more opportunities. So those people who possess Hindi as their mother tongue, they can actively engage in the educational practices without having any kind of pressures while comparing to the marginalized students or vernacular students who possess Tamil, Telugu or Malayalam as their native language. In the case of opportunities and the power relation, in the power relations. So this should be understood by attaching it with the chronological gradual implementation of cultural hegemony, which has its root in the formation of the modern nation state itself. So as a next point, I would like to speak about the aspect of social justice in the policy. So we can see that the policy, while reproducing all kinds of hegemonic notions, both culturally, economically and politically, the report is prepared in a very apolitical language of merit, which can easily attract the urban liberal middle class psyche. It brings in the conventional anti-reservation argument of merit in a further nuanced way, where the systematic methods of caste-based exclusions are neglected and the mere manifestations of such exclusions. By manifestations I mean, so when there is this caste discrimination, it doesn't always show us caste discriminations in the public sphere, but rather it will show us poverty or illiteracy or health issues or malnutrition. So the policy mentions about all these mere manifestations of caste discrimination, caste class discrimination, but it does not talk about caste, or it does not talk about the root cause. According to one of the reports came in the New Indian Express, the 484 pages document in fact reveals a single mention of reservation, and that too only to say that private institutions of higher education need not to follow reservation. So this is very interesting. So where in the contrary, the word merit is mentioned around 40 times in the document at various crucial policy level points. The word caste is also nominally mentioned, as it appears in only 2 crucial places apart from total 6 mentions in the entire document, including index and glossary. So we can see that the policy also proposes various kinds of common entrance tests such as NTA and such entrance tests for entering into the higher educational sectors of the society. So all these aptitude testing measures and the logic of common entrance tests on the basis of merit tend to ignore the existing realities of inequalities in the prevailing society. It can be understood that time in the context of India works as a power structure. So it is very important to understand time as a power structure. Time acts as a power structure in the society of India. For example, we can see a Brahmin or an upper caste person might have acquired education in the 1800s from higher educational institutions, from foreign higher educational institutions such as Cambridge and Oxford, while majority of the Dalit Bahujan minority will be working on the paddy fields or wheat fields of these upper caste person. So the idea of time is not same for them. So there is an evident power structure, a graded power structure working in the very idea of time itself in the sociological context of post-colonial colonial India. So when we imagine everything in a linear space and time, in a linear idea of progress, we should realize that this very imagination of linear progress is a structural violence for a Bahujan idea of time, because a Bahujan idea of time differs from the Savarna idea of Savarna imagination of time. So it is very important to approach this policy from a structural level in order to understand the historical violence and the structural injustice behind many celebrated recommendations, which are often hailed by liberal historians and liberal academicians. Even most of the vocal critics of the policy who understand this as a singular project of communalization or even saffronization often tends to ignore the very existing realities of discriminations prevailing in the higher educational sector. It is also important to note that these sectors are officially transforming into exclusive upper caste class spaces when the Bahujan minorities who have acquired social mobility have started to form a new political theoretical imaginations in the university spaces in the post-Mandal period. If these new reformations are dangerous, it is also important not to forget that all these educational spaces which are now hailed by left liberal progressives as like when the policy came, most of the left liberal critics were claiming for this for saving these educational like institutions, especially JNU and other such central university education institutions. But it is also important to note that all these higher educational institutions were already existing by sabotaging and converting reservations by sabotaging the entire the very idea of the reservation, and by converting reserved seats into general seats. All these educational institutions were already very exclusive in their idea of social justice. So they were already protecting and preserving their own casteist upper caste spaces, academic spaces, whether it is in the case of teaching posters, or in the case of faculties, or whether it is in the case of students. We can see that all these central universities has been maintaining for years a highly highly structurally discriminative, in highly Puritan notions of caste and such other remarks of inequalities. So according to a UGC annual report of 2017 and 18, in 30 central universities, the 95% of the professors belong to forward caste, while share of ST is just 1%, where OBC stands at 1% and SC stands as 3%. So it is important to note this very existing divide in the even in the faculty distribution. So like all these statistics shows, it is at a time when marginalized minorities and Bahujans started to disrupt the equilibrium, the upper caste equilibrium of the central universities, like the upper caste fortresses of domination, that this new policy has been implemented. So we can clearly see that when we analyze the Indian education structure, we can see that the Bahujan, the Dalit Bahujan students have been entering to the into these casteist spaces from the in the post-Mandal period only. That is to say that only 20-30 years before. So when the second generation of these Dalit Bahujans who have acquired a kind of relative social mobility started to begin to enter or disrupt these existing equilibriums, existing notions of cultural hegemony and casteist hegemony in these central university spaces or in other higher educational spaces in India, that the new education. So this is very important to note that the new educational policy is coming at a time when Dalit Bahujan political imaginations has been acquiring social and political ground in the very existing by disrupting very existing notions of purity and discrimination in the academic sphere. We can also see that this new policy is an evident example for the notorious capability of caste system to transcend the challenges of by mentioning new I mean the challenges of neoliberalism and the further increasing capitalism by preserving without giving up the old, which I mean the old structural notions of caste and purity, by creating a new caste order boosted by they create a new caste order by using these very neoliberal machineries and conventional rhetoric of progress and merit in the academic sphere of India. Their entire aim is to sustain a rigid hegemony in all the spheres of social participation. When we look so it is very important that when we look at this policy through the economic deterministic lens or through the lens of parliamentary politics, there are high chances that we will miss the dangerous practicalities of cultural hegemony and the strength of the ideology which informs and influences these policies. Most of the critics of policy tries to blame it all on the political parties such as BJP and such, and its corporate nexus at the cost of ignoring the long-term project of Savarna hegemony, both at the level of culture and power. So this should be understood by tracing the genealogy of a crucial cultural problem and a very long debate which has its roots in the formation of post-colonial state itself or in the national movement itself. The Savarna Brahmanic logic is at the one end of this debate, and where the Bahujan minority logic positions itself on the opposite side of this debate. Most of the mainstream political formations in this debate, even the organizations which are opposing the new education policy, we can see that even these political organizations has been informed or influenced by this very Brahmanic Savarna ideology. Therefore, it would be a kind of reductionist approach to accuse a political party for all the troubles instead of blaming the very ideology behind all this policy level and cultural level hegemony. So, we can see that this cultural hegemonic argument and logic not only has prevailed, but it has been constantly or gradually improved as the progression of time by expanding its practical ideological domains, by adding various kinds of arguments, or by using various kinds of machineries. For example, neoliberalism in the 90s. So this policy level shift should be addressed as an ideal time of transformation for an all-round ideology to bring the political, cultural and practical public sphere of India under the very cultural logic of Brahmanism. So criticizing it by only taking up a part of its larger framework will only help the very idea of Brahmanism to expand its practical domain of ideology through various other channels which they already have access to. Therefore, it becomes our. I am concluding my words. Therefore, it becomes our duty to understand this ideology in all its domains and logic at first, and modify our critical tools and practical resources to resist these cultural projects which comes under various names and various states.